I've heard a lot of people talk about early access from a developer point of view, the benefits for the developer and the dangers inherent in such a system. I've also heard people talk about failed early access games and the occasional scandal caused by them. What I haven't heard much talk about is how we, as consumers of games, should view and handle early access. Most advice has been along the same line as pre-ordering a game. Just don't. And what is early access if not the ultimate pre-order bonus? As I've played RimWorld over the last few weeks, I've been thinking about the consumer side of early access more and more. Here I am playing an alpha of an unreleased game with what one would assume is only a fraction of the total content that will be available at release. But I'm having a ball. Seriously. So what does that mean for us gamers? Do we support games that look promising with the hopes that with proper funding they become our next favorite game? Or do we staunchly adhere to the don't pre-order games mantra in the hopes that we don't get burned by bad development? It's a tough decision, and it doesn't have a right answer in my opinion. That's why I'd like to propose my personal policy regarding early access. Don't buy an early access game unless you are happy with the current state of the game, not what may come in future updates or what it could be on release, what the game is right now when you buy it. But here's the problem with that logic. The current hype culture surrounding early access makes knowing the status of the game at any given moment really difficult. I mean, just look at any game on the Steam Early Access page and you'll see hype trailers with epic music, a list of projected features and goals on release, and screenshots taken from the very best the game has to offer. It gets even worse when you scroll down to the reviews and see things like this. Or this. None of this prepares you to make a decision on whether or not to buy the game at that moment. Instead, you may be convinced by seeing the very best the developers and reviewers want to show you, but when you get into the game, you find that there's only the smallest amount of the promised content in the game. Let's take a look at some examples. Cube World is probably the most notorious case of lack of content in an early access game. Back in July 2013, Picroma released a playable version of their voxel-based Minecraft Zelda Terraria mashup to an overwhelming success. Simply put, the game looked amazing, so much so that I made several videos about it here on my channel. However, after playing it for those videos and a few hours more, I had exhausted all the content the game had to give. With early access being a relatively new concept, I shelved the game and eagerly awaited new content, which never came. The developers completely fell off the face of the earth for a year. In 2014, they released a video detailing the new questing system that would add a huge amount of content to the game, and then nothing until 2016. This means that anyone who bought the game based on the hype was left holding the bag for nearly 3 years. A more recent and ultimately less egregious example of this is Keen Games' Portal Knights. I bought Portal Knights almost a year ago now on Steam. The best way to describe this game is an action-oriented Minecraft with quests and bosses. It's also a really beautiful game in the same way that Cube World was. At the time, I was itching for some sort of buildable game with a leveling system, and Portal Knights seemed to have it. Unfortunately, the game was in a bare-bones state at that time, and while it did have the portal, crafting, and combat systems in place, they didn't have a whole lot of depth to them. It's a great concept of a game, but the content just wasn't there. Now, in their defense, they've added quite a bit to the game over the last year, with consistent updates and great communication, and I think it's going to turn out pretty good. But that doesn't change the fact that I don't think the purchase was worth the time I got out of it until very recently. The lesson I've learned from these games and others is that you need to accurately set your expectations based on the state of the game and then make your decision about whether or not it's worth it to you. But how do you go about finding out the state of an early access game? Most people would tell you to look at reviews, and they'd be right if you were talking about a fully released game. But many review outlets and YouTube channels don't do full reviews of early access games, they wait until release. You can definitely find those reviews if you look hard enough, and they should absolutely be used as your first source when you can get them. However, they can also become quickly outdated after an update hits, especially if they go for any amount of detail. That's part of the reason why my RimWorld review was so general and nothing specific, because I didn't want it to become outdated in the future. Instead, here are a few suggestions on where you should look to shape your expectations. My first suggestion is Reddit threads. And I'm not talking about the subreddit for the game in question. I find the game's most ardent fans that post opinions of the game in its subreddit are quick to gloss over any flaws and deficiencies in its content. I mean, just look at the Nintendo subreddit when the news about the online service broke. Instead, I'm talking about threads in the gaming, games, and other general communities. You are less likely to be flooded with overly positive opinions on a game and instead get a more balanced take on the state of the game as it is right then. If you are going to use Reddit, just make sure the information is recent enough to still be relevant. You don't want to be looking at a month-old thread about a talent system only to find that a game update has addressed this. My next suggestion is streaming. In my opinion, this is the best way to get an idea about any game. Because of how streaming works, you aren't going to see only the cherry-picked moments from the trailers and screenshots. You probably won't even see the highlights from reviews. Instead, what you're going to see is what the game is at its most basic level, the level you're going to experience when you play the game. Does the streamer look like they enjoy it? Hell, you could probably even ask them for their off-the-cuff opinion and get an answer right then. What about the amount of content? Are they streaming it for days or just a few hours? You can quickly start to form your expectations for your purchase from all this information. Best of all, you can almost guarantee that what you're seeing is the latest build of the game in question. But let's say you do your research on a game and decide it's something you want to buy, and you get it and you love it to pieces. Unfortunately, that doesn't mean that the game you bought will stay the same. In my experience, this is usually a good thing. As the game becomes more feature complete, you get more things to do. But I've had game experiences become worse as development has progressed. A great example of this is Starbound. When the backer program was launched on the Humble Store in April 2013, I was one of the first people to pick it up. A developer from Terraria promising Terraria in space? Are you kidding me? Take my money. As the first build finally released, I played through it and thought it was super charming. I made some videos on my channel as well in the same style as my Terraria tutorial videos. To say I was pumped about the game's possibility is an understatement, but after playing it for a bit, it was clear the game lacked a majority of its content. That's fine, I just made my videos and waited for more releases. Now, in their defense, they were very clear about the current state of the game, and the communication was consistent throughout development. However, as I checked in on new builds, it became clear that Starbound began to move in a very different direction than what I was expecting. Now that the game has been released, it's fair to say that it's definitely different than what I expected. That's not to say Starbound is not a great game, because it is. It's just not what I was expecting when I hopped on board the early access train. And this is only one example of an early access game changing severely. Another one is Darkest Dungeon. Even if we follow the mantra of don't buy an early access game unless you're happy with the current state of the game, the fact is development may take the game in a totally different direction. So bringing it back home, where does that put us in terms of early access? Honestly, that's entirely up to you. Do you want to support the development of a new game in the hopes that it becomes your new favorite? Or do you want to wait and see so you don't get burned? Even after all my early access disappointments, I'd put myself in that first camp, as long as I follow my policy. But I'm also lucky enough to not be as worried about losing out on the typical indie price tag of $10 to $20. But I know there are definitely people out there that can't do that. So what are your thoughts? Are you for early access or against it? Do you have a personal early access policy? What do you think about mine? Let me know in the comments because I'm interested to see what you guys think. Maybe you can teach me something I didn't know. Anyway guys, I appreciate all the support and I'll see you guys later.